try and do the impossible. I've noticed some of the scepticism of some of our colleagues in the front row here in terms of my ability to sum this up. It's been very diverse, but I'll try and do my best and we'll see how we get on. We started out this evening with a series of views actually about whether or not the globe was going to warm 4 degrees or 6 degrees, and someone else said along the way that they thought that 2 degrees was achievable. That's certainly something we'll be taking away to have a further look at. We heard some other views about getting a path to a zero carbon economy. I reflect on a discussion actually in Nelson on Wednesday last week, where at least one of the speakers there suggested that even with wind turbines, one needed to take a much broader view of the amount of carbon that was actually in the wind turbines and other ways of getting renewable electricity. So there's a sort of different view that's been expressed there than has been expressed tonight. Others tonight have expressed a view that says it has to be lower than zero carbon to achieve 350 parts per million. Now, it's fair to say that we've heard of diversity of views. There's been one speaker at least that says there's no reason to do anything. So there's no reason to do anything. We'll record that in the things we pick up.
It's one option for John Key.
We've heard also tonight that many in the audience do not want further focus on electric vehicles. The preference among many of you is around more focus on public transport. Yet despite that, some of you have talked about innovation, some of you have talked about technical and non-technical technological advances, and suggested that there needs to be a look back in terms of the level of change that's occurred over the last 5 years as a bit of an indicator about what might happen over the course of the next 5 or 10 years. Some of you have talked about the co-benefits, particularly in relation to health. In terms of all of the public meetings we've done so far, this is the first meeting where that health benefit and co-benefit from climate change action has come through as strongly as it has. We've heard quite a lot about costs, and I guess I should say a few words about that. People have made the point, and I think quite strongly, that indeed there are both economic and environmental costs of seeing 2 degrees or even 4 degrees warming in the planet, and particularly New Zealand. It's really difficult to take some of the general models and work that's been done globally and try and apply that to New Zealand. Part of what we will be taking back, however, in terms of the messages delivered this evening in other centres, is the fact that more work needs to be done on that in terms of things like species loss, inundation in towns and cities, and also the environmental costs. Another thing that's come up this evening that's not come up elsewhere, and may well do as we move around the country over the next few days, is the notion of changing corporate legislation to get more focus on social responsibility and more particularly to widen board responsibilities to meet the needs of all stakeholders rather than just of shareholders. There's been a theme around that from several speakers also in relation to investment performance and more particularly the notion of seeing a dovetailing between government policy in relation to that and where those investments are made. There's a pretty strong focus, at least in some of the speakers, talking about financial risk and the possibility of stranded assets if some of those signals aren't seen more strongly. This has to be the first meeting where we've been asked not to hype people up. Somehow or other I didn't think that was necessary, but you know, we'll take that as it comes. We've heard quite a lot about the ability of New Zealand to influence other major emitters internationally through specific action. Now somebody, I'll come back to this, but actually I'll go to the next piece. People have talked about subsidies in New Zealand, and we hear that view. I did want to relay though the fact that the New Zealand government is spending a lot of time and also taking quite a strong leadership role working with other countries to look at fossil fuel subsidies internationally. And if you believe that New Zealand has significant fossil fuel subsidies, you should look at some other both developing and developed countries. And New Zealand's trying to do its bit to see that reduced.
Not being as bad as everyone else isn't good.
I didn't say that. That's not the point I was making. The point I was making is there are some other people who are worse than New Zealand.
I thought you were summarising, not making points.
Okay.
We want to be better than the rest.
Okay. So, the last thing I wanted to pick up. was questions that were raised of us in terms of what officials' advice around this target and the intended nationally determined contribution will be. I think it's interesting to pick up the theme that's come up in many of the contributions this evening about political consensus. Indeed, some of you have challenged the Green MPs in the audience as to why there's not a political consensus.
Because the whole system's adversarial.
Well said.
I was going to make a different point. And the different point is...
We're more likely to get an honest response from the Green MPs.
Hear, hear.
Keep the flag, change the system.
The point I was going to make is that to get a political consensus sometimes requires a community consensus.
Now it needs a better national consensus.
And the notion of actually starting to look at how that community consensus might be arrived at is a question that also needs to be thought about. Now the question about the process, we've been asked by ministers to do 14 of these meetings. It's going to be probably more like 16 by the time we finish. And our primary focus has been to pick up all of the themes that have been put forward tonight. It's also been to make sure that we encourage all of you in the audience tonight, rather than simply relying on a meeting like this, to actually make a formal written submission in whatever form you choose to, whether that's by an email, a letter, or through the website. Our job then is to translate all of the views we've heard over the course of this 2-week period and the 4-week consultation period in general to provide further advice to ministers. We are working as officials on providing advice around the intended nationally determined contribution on 3 key things. The first is New Zealand's international positioning and the influence that New Zealand's target would have on other countries in terms of taking action on greenhouse gas mitigation, adaptation and the like. The second part of that advice is on the cost and benefits to New Zealand, and you've implored us this evening to make sure that those costs and the benefits include wider action on climate change rather than just on the economy and households. The last bit that we're providing advice on is the way in which you get a pathway to a low emissions economy. That will form the basis of our advice, and ministers will then take that advice and make decisions. That's their right. They're democratically elected. All officials can do in this instance is listen to the views you express.
You're addressing this meeting. We just get in the microphone and speak to it all instead of mumbling.
My humble apologies. Finally, just to reiterate it.
Those 3 points again, please, are quite important.
You seem to miss out opportunities as well.
I think you might have missed a key theme, that we have doubts about your ability to represent our views.
You've been very clear.
Did you write that one down?
Hands up who thinks they listen to us. Hands up who thinks they don't.
If New Zealand were being invaded, what would we do? This, you are the war office, but the tenor of the conversation is like we're talking about library lending policies. This is going to be far more devastating than any war that has ever been waged on this planet if we don't do something about it. You are our first line. You need to be, this needs to be like Winston Churchill and people all sitting around the table pushing things around on maps. Figuring out, industry, during the war, industry gets mobilized. It's not about, does this car manufacturer, are they going to put their profits up? It's, can we get this car manufacturer to start, churning out what they need to churn out? It's a war.
Just to reflect that view, maybe I can finish off with 2 last key themes. The first one is a view from many of you that there needs to be more leadership, both domestically and internationally, on these issues.
Yeah, should have come number 1.
And secondly, a fairly general view that the sort of target that New Zealand should be aiming for in its intended nationally determined contribution should be at least minus 40% on 1990.
Yeah, where's the plan in this?
Yeah, thank you, sir. The cost of inaction, we've made a note of that. And we also made a note of the plan, the policy and the plan.
Let's talk about near-term human extinction. That's what we're looking at.
Okay, look, I'm going to draw the meeting to a close there. More than happy to stay behind and chat if you like, but thanks very much again for your attendance this evening. Cheers.